Good morning, everybody, and we're on to the next chapter of our story, The Explorer, which is called Sardines, after he found the tin of empty sardines in the water. It took longer to coax the raft back upstream. Lila steered them close to the bank, and they hauled their way along on overhanging branches when the pole wasn't long enough. Sorry about that, everybody. Where was I? They hauled their way along on overhanging branches when the pole wasn't enough. The branches hung low, and all four were covered in ants and spiderwebs by the time they reached their home stretch of the river, with fresh scratches on their hands. "It was here," said Con. "I recognised the way those vines wrapped around that branch." The branch stuck out conveniently over the river. It was perfectly placed to act as a mooring branch. It jutted out at an ideal angle, right above a bank of black Amazon soil. Fred stood wobbling hard on the raft. "Watch it," said Con. The branch was just over his head. It was covered in tendrils where it met the tree, and shone green in the sunlight. He grabbed a hold of it, tied a loop in the end of his liana rope, and hung it over the branch. "That's perfect," said Lila, "like a kotuk for our boat." "It is perfect." Fred stayed standing, looking up at the branch in his hand. He peered closer. "It's perfect because someone made it perfect." There was a beat of silence. Then, "What do you mean?" asked Con. She spoke very quietly. Fred didn't answer. He moved the branch to and fro under its covering of vines. It creaked backwards and forwards under his hand. The vines wound like a rope around it in a figure of 8, repeated over and over. "It didn't grow here. It's been tied on." Max was staring open-mouthed. "Who did it? Did you?" "No, Maxie," said Lila quietly. "Not him. Somebody else." Fred looked behind him. A gust of wind caught a pile of fallen leaves and spun them across the forest floor. Then the back of his neck prickled. He reminded himself again that trees do not keep secrets. They walked back to the clearing in single file. Fred came last. He turned to look backwards at every step. The rustling in the bushes seemed to follow them, but it was just the wind, he told himself. Wind is a trickster. It plays havoc with your courage. The fire still had hot embers at its heart, and Fred lay down on his stomach in the grass and earth, blowing at it like a bellows, his chin inches from the fire. His eyes were red and smoky by the time it rekindled, but the roar of it sent a wave of relief through his chest. The fire was the closest thing they had to a weapon, and its warmth felt like safety. Lila was arranging their shoes, which had been soaked on the raft, in a circle around the ashes. "Can I see the thing that you found in the water?" she asked. Fred held it out. Most of the writing was covered in rust, but he could see, written on its base, the ingredients. "Look at the bottom," he said. "It says, canned in Plymouth." Lila looked blank. "Plymouth is in England," said Fred. "Down by the sea." "I didn't know you had fish in England," said Max. "Of course we have fish. What do you think we eat?" said Con. "Crumpets," said Max. "And cigars." "But if the tin comes from England," began Lila. "Then it must have come with whoever made camp," said Fred. "An explorer, maybe." "Who goes exploring with sardines?" asked Con. "People used to come out here for all sorts of things, pianos and china ornaments. Sardines seem normal in comparison," said Fred. He felt a hot surge rising in his chest. If the person who made the camp had been English, he might have been one of the explorers from the newspapers Fred had read, one of the explorers who never returned. Percy Fawcett, Simon Murphy, Christopher McLaren. "I had a book," said Fred, "about a man called Hiram Bingham. He was climbing, and he came across a whole city built by the Incas. It wasn't exactly discovering, because some of the Peruvians knew about it, but nobody else did. Can you imagine? It would be like suddenly finding the ruins of Birmingham in 1,000 years' time." Lila moved closer. Her eyes were set far apart in her face, eyes that could look full of many different things at once. Now they radiated curiosity. "I've heard about it. It's called Machu Picchu." "Yes, that was the name. Usually, though, the men just go missing." "Like us," said Max. "Sort of," said Fred, "except usually it's because they're dead, and we're not." "Yet," said Con, ominously. Fred ignored that. "And there was this man called Percy Fawcett. He was looking for a ruined city. He called it the City of Zed, and then not long ago, it was in 1925, I think, he just disappeared. And another man, Christopher McLaren, he went on an expedition to find out if Fawcett's dream was real. He was my favourite. He wrote letters about waking up to find maggots growing in the crook of his elbow. How lovely, said Con. Did the maggots get him? Nobody knows. He sent a telegram and then he disappeared. Fred hesitated. I memorised it, actually. How does it go? Asked Lila. Fred cleared his throat. Just a line from this last outpost of civilization to advise you that I am about to go out of communication. I am well and fit, and there is every hope of a successful issue to the expedition, risky as it is in some ways. Khan raised both eyebrows. He sounds fun. Newspapers want people to sound like that, as if they have very clean shoes, but I know he wasn't like that. The other men said he was the maddest and bravest of a mad, brave generation. Why did you memorise it, though? Fred blew on the fire again, so they wouldn't see his face reddening. I just like the idea that there's still some things that we don't know. At school it's the same thing every day, and I liked that it might be all right to believe in large, mad, wild things. The journey on the raft had taken up the whole morning, but still the afternoon stretched ahead of them, thick and green and vibrating with heat. We need more wood, said Fred. They would burn through what they had by the time dark came. They needed so many things, he thought. Food and a plan or a map or a passing ship, but at least wood was something he knew where to find it. His vision swam as he stood. He was growing weaker, and the blood in his veins felt thinner. At first, Fred went fast, his head down, marking the trees with an X scratched in the bark, watching his feet among the roots and fallen branches. But soon he began to slow. There was so much to look at, so much that was strange, so much that was new and vast and very palpably alive. The trees dipped down their branches, laden with leaves broad enough to sew into trousers. He passed a tree with a vast termite nest as big as a bathtub growing around it. He gave that a wide berth. The greenness, which had seemed such a forbidding wall of colour, was not up-close green at all, Fred thought. It was all different, 1,000 different colours, lime and emerald and moss and jade, and a deep dark, almost black green that made him think of sunken ships. Fred breathed in the smell. He had been wrong to think it was thick, he thought. It was detailed. It was a tapestry of air. The trees clustered more closely together the further he walked. The light grew dimmer, though he was sure it was still mid-afternoon, a deep green filtering down through a roof of leaves and vines. He heard something move in one of the green bushes that clustered around his feet. "Hello?" he called. He stepped backwards. "Hi!" As he called, something sharp scraped against his arm. He jumped and leapt away, swearing, and felt his mouth fill with the taste of fear, bile, and tin. But it wasn't a snake, or even a spider. "Being stupid," muttered Fred. "It was just a bush." Or perhaps it wasn't even a bush. He leant closer. It was a clump of spiky fruit. "A pineapple," he whispered out loud. Fred felt his fingertips prickle, shot through with a spark of discovery. This, he thought, must be what Columbus felt like. He reached out to pull the fruit from its throne of leaves and then snatched his hand back, watching blood swell from a serrated gash in his thumb. "Ah!" he whispered. He braced himself, wrenched up 5 of the biggest pineapples and set off a run, a slightly jolting run, checking every few trees for the X and doubling back 3 times. At last, he burst through the trees at the edge of the clearing. He was met by a scream. "Get back!" Lila was standing in front of Max, one arm pushing him behind her, a stick pointed in the direction of Fred's throat. Con stood behind her, fists raised. "I bought some pineapples," panted Fred. "Whew!" Then slowly he took in the scene. He grinned. "Were you planning to kill me?" "We thought you were a wild animal," Con said, flushing deep red. "Call out next time you come charging straight at us." It was Max who saw the pineapples in his arms. He gave a roar of joy that shook the fire and sat down, his teeth bared ready. He held out both hands. "Mine! Mine! Mine!" he said. Fred turned the pineapple in his hands, looking for a way in. Gingerly he bit into the side of the fruit. A spike got up his nose and another into his gum, but the juice was the most spectacular thing he had ever tasted. It was sweet and warm, and it sparked on his tongue. "It's amazing," he said. "It's like eating electricity." Con took a bite out of hers. "It's more like waging a war than seems fair for dessert," she said. Fred used his nails to scrape away the skin and dug out a handful of flesh. He held it out to Max. "Here, you'll like it." Lila was bent over her fruit, her plaits hanging over her lap. Now she looked up and grinned. "Are you sure you wouldn't like a flint?" she said. She'd cut out into her pineapple with the arrowhead flints and carved out rough palm-sized chunks. She laid them out in a row. "Oh, that might be an improvement," said Fred. Somehow he had pineapple juice in his ear. Con laughed. Lila hacked the 5th pineapple into quarters. "For breakfast," she said. She wrapped each piece in a large leaf and stacked them outside the den. So it seems like our 4 explorers are getting very used to being in the wild, and they're finding all these different strategies to help them survive. I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.